if everything's about you, you're not making a splash. The only thing that you're making a splash in is in your own life. But if you make your actions about others, then those ripples go on.
Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Ashley, and today I'm joined by Pete Wright for a conversation on all things sports, faith, creativity, and growth. Pete is a former tennis player and teaching pro who shifted paths to become a professional sports photographer, covering the NCAA, the NFL, NBA, NASCAR, just to name a few. Today, he works as a brand marketing manager with S1. He's also an author and creative entrepreneur, grounded in faith, a proud dad of high school senior twins, and building a life and projects alongside his beautiful wife. In the middle of it all, he still finds time to keep a racket or camera in his hands whenever he can. And I'm excited to introduce him to the Endurance Diaries. So, with that, Pete, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to be on with amazing people. You and I have chatted before, and your story blows me away. So getting to know you has been pretty cool. So anytime somebody like you asks me to hop on, it's always a pleasure. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm excited for this conversation. And, as we've chatted about before, my journey as an athlete, is deeply woven throughout my story. And I know that athletics has also played a huge role in your life as well. And there's so much to learn. So, I would love to start there. This podcast is about our personal journeys, overcoming challenges and the things that, inspire us to keep moving forward. And oftentimes we can make those connections to where it is that we are now. Can you take us through the time as a tennis player and coach, and then your transition into sports photography and what inspired that shift?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything for me in my life really traces back to my father. If you look at my life, he's kind of been the architect of who I am. He passed when I was 17, but all the things that have kind of made who I am as an adult kind of draw back to him. He was a tennis player, and I started going out to the courts with him when I was like 6. And I was kind of the ball boy. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was the kid that I saw the guys running back and forth on the court, grabbing the tennis balls in between. And I didn't know. I remember just irritating him because he'd be playing tennis with another pastor or another friend. And in the middle of a point, I'd run out and grab the ball off the court and hold it up because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. And you ruined the point. I was winning or whatever. So eventually he put a rack in my hand so I'd get out of the way and he'd send me over to the wall and sign me up for lessons. And I grew up playing tennis. Similarly, as a minister, every minister has hobbies and they take their hobbies very seriously. His hobby was photography. So, those were kind of the two key things. And then I ended up ultimately also becoming a public speaker and lecturer and a writer. Well, he was a minister. He was on the pulpit and he wrote sermons every week. So all the things that have established who I am as an adult came from him. And they all kind of not on purpose, they just kind of morphed that way. So I grew up playing tennis because it was something my dad did and I enjoyed watching it. And, I guess when we look at our lives transitioning from a child to an adult to a father, you realize it's like, I hope that my kids one day do everything a step better than what I did. And I realize now that that was the goal my dad had for me. He never played tennis in high school or college or professionally at any level, but I had the pleasure of doing that. So I played all through my juniors and played in tournaments and got, state rankings and everything, and then played on a nationally ranked Division III college team. Now, I wasn't one of the better players on the team. I was like low end, like number 6 on the team. It was the top guys that got those national rankings. So I was just happy to be on the team, but it's cool to have been able to have played at that level and be around those guys and played on a team. Even though it was Division III, I was playing on a college tennis team. And when you look at the number of people that play college sports in general, it's not a big number. So it's kind of an exclusive club even at the lower levels. But having the realization that yes, I was on this team, but I was down here, but then turning it into a career and being a teaching pro But over time, you start realizing your body starts failing and injuries, even just as a teaching pro, standing out on the court in the heat and feeding tennis balls and doing the same thing over and over. It starts breaking down joints and body parts and trying to play competitively at the same time. But then you start realizing, man, I've loved photography for a long, long time, and because I've always been around sports, I didn't just play tennis. I played lots of other sports recreationally as well. So I understood sports. I understood the flow of things and how things should happen and when things would unfold and the best place to be to see it. And I had been in photography, the same thing with my dad. The only way I could get around being in dad's photos were to be with him taking the photos. So he taught me photography. As at 14 years old, I got my first job for the town newspaper where I wrote articles and covered photos for the things that I was writing. And I found out very quickly I took the job to write, but I got paid by the column inch. And a photo took up a lot more space than the writing did. So at the games I would go cover, I'd take the photos. Well, when my body started getting to the point where I was having a lot of injuries and I needed extra income, I was given some opportunities to start photographing. I was in Greenville, North Carolina, and East Carolina University, which is where my wife and I both went to school, approached me and they said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody to do the sports photography for all of our teams. And we heard you could do that." And it just kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't something I was looking for. It was an opportunity that was presented to me. And I'm like, man, I would love that. This is like a dream job. So I was able to still teach tennis in Greenville where we lived, but I was able to cover all of their sports photography. So I traveled with the teams. I photographed games. I did all their headshots. I did their media day stuff. I did their team photos. And from there, it just kind of progressed. I picked up another school and another team. We moved to Virginia and I still photograph East Carolina stuff, but I started doing everything for Virginia Commonwealth University as well, and then started shooting some for U of R. And because Richmond was a much larger city, they would host events for the NBA and national championship things for the NCAA. So I got many opportunities because of my connections with these schools to shoot larger events. And then you meet other photographers and they bring you in on things. So it just kind of unrolled into a life of happy blessings of just one thing connected to another and not necessarily opportunities I went looking for, but opportunities that were presented to me to take things that I was passionate about and combine them into a really long career that I've been able to enjoy.
I think one thing that really stands out and just allowing that open posture in a way throughout that journey and how a possibility opened here and opened here and opened here as you were playing tennis and growing up in that way. Did you ever imagine that then fast forward sometime after you had those opportunities that you had?
Now, it's funny because when you're young, you have this dream mentality, and you also I think especially as an athlete, I think we all and you have to. You always think you're better than you are, you know? It's like and you tell people that, and I think back to myself when I was in my 20s and or even my teens, man, I must have been the most arrogant idiot ever. It's like, I thought I could beat players that I didn't even belong on the same court with. I thought I had a future. Like, my dream was one day I'm gonna move to Bradenton, Florida, and I'm gonna teach at Bollettieri Academy, you know? And who knew I would end up in Bradenton, Florida, and I would do work for IMG one day? I mean, great. I mean, it's not quite the path I thought I was gonna take, but here I am. When you're young, I think that brashness and that arrogance serves you well because it pushes you to try for things that maybe are really realistically out of your reach. But as you get older and more mature, you start to realize that humility is probably
Mm.
a much better tool in the tool chest, and you start realizing what your limitations really are. And I think that's an age thing and a growth thing. I think when we're young, we learn to reach beyond what our limitations are. And then as we get older, we realize what those limitations are and we settle into where what we really should be. But if we didn't have that arrogance, if we didn't have that higher expectations for ourselves, we'd never reach and maybe find where that is. I was talking to a coworker earlier today and I'm like, there's times in our lives where we're still just toddlers testing the boundaries to see how far we can go. And when somebody says, nope, that's too far. Uh,
Mm.
and I think we're always in those stages, but the older we get, the quicker we realize where that boundary is. But I think it's sad if we stop trying to find boundaries and we settle in. And I feel like when I meet other people who were athletes at any level in their life, whether it was a high school athlete, a college athlete, or a professional athlete, you find that those people are always pushing the boundary, trying to find what that next level is. We've got a guy that we hired recently at S1 where I work, who used to be a high level collegiate hockey player. I haven't even met him. I've just been told about him. And they're like, yeah, this guy's a sales guy. And, this guy's a hunter. He's out looking, he's pushing those boundaries. To me, that was the thing. It was like, you know, reaching the age where I knew here is where the peak is, and I've pushed to see where it is. I found it, and now realizing that's where it is, and settling in and doing the best I can at that level of those different things. And doing that throughout my life, whether it's in sports, whether it's in photography, whether it's in different phases of my life, and transitioning to where, you know, I think when I was really competitive in all things, I wasn't necessarily open to helping others. I was more about myself. I was very selfish as I was young. It's like, okay, what can I do for me as a tennis player? What can I do for me as a photographer? And fortunately, I learned very early in life that I'll get much further if I'm willing to help others along the way because they'll remember that and there'll be times I need help. So I got to a point where if I had an extra camera on me and there was somebody beside me that was on the sidelines for their first game and they just had like a kit lens, like the basic lens that came with it, and I knew they weren't gonna get the best shots, I'm like, "Hey, I'm not using this lens right now. Why don't you try this one? Let me give you some tips. Hey, I'm going to another game next week that's a little higher level game. I got an extra credential. Do you wanna come along with me?" Or a tennis player that's on the court that's just getting started. Hey, I can feed you some balls if you want to hit a little bit and try something out. And just realizing there's a stage in your life where you have to start becoming more of a mentor to help the next generation and realizing that that's where your peak is. You kind of go through peaks and valleys and you have a peak I think when you're in your mid-20s to early 30s as that's where that is, and then you kinda level off and you feel like you're going down, but then you find that there's another peak now where now you're the teacher, the mentor, the helper, and so I finding those peaks and kinda leveling in, and I know I'm kind of in that second peak right now where I'm not at the top of my game as an athlete or as a photographer anymore, but I'm at the peak of my game as, a teacher, a mentor, somebody that's willing to open the book and answer any questions you have, and nothing's a secret because there's nothing. I had the arrogance when I was young that the things I was doing, I was the only one doing those, and I
Yeah.
was that it's a trade secret. There's nothing I was doing then that other people weren't doing and probably were doing better, but there's an arrogance that we are, and the realization of that is like, "Listen, there's nothing I'm doing that's a secret. Everybody's doing it. But if I can else get there, great."
Yeah, I mean, I also think about that too as like, when you're the best on your team in high school and then you go to college and you're surrounded by 10, 15 other players who are also the best at their high school and you realize like I may not be the best anymore. But just to your point, like it's very humbling in that. And I think there's so much to learn about how we do push ourselves, especially younger on, in that stage. And you want to be competitive and you're pushing, pushing, pushing the limits in that. And then how that can just expand and open you up, in a lot of ways to other possibilities outside of your sport whenever we can kind of shift a bit in that way and see that like you are more than just this sport and you can still stay connected to the sport in a way that you've done through photography as well. And I think that's such a huge encouragement to people who are on that journey in sport regardless of whatever level you're at, that there is so much more outside of that and it's worth exploring, it's worth taking those steps out. And so I just want to say that because I think that's very important part in this. And then, I think growing up as athletes, we're learning so much about ourselves through that process and stretching ourselves, pushing ourselves. And there's a lot that I think we both could speak to in that regard in terms of what you learn as an athlete. And then whenever you're on the other side of it and you are coaching or you're mentoring that, there's also so much that you learn about yourself. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of those learnings that you've discovered in yourself, taking on that position in a way where you are extending that help to somebody else or you are, more in that mentor role?
I think I realized at a pretty young age, probably in my mid 30s, early 30s, I was a much better teacher than I was student. As an athlete, again, the same thing. I always had these expectations that I could beat anybody. And then I'd go out on the court for a big tournament and I'd go out as one of the top seeds. And I'd lose to players that theoretically I shouldn't lose to because I would get humbled and maybe I would take them too lightly. And I would sometimes I would beat them, sometimes I would lose to them. And the guys that above you, sometimes you get lucky against them and sometimes you wouldn't. And I think as a player, you start realizing that maybe you're not as good as you thought you were. There's only a handful of players, I think, in the world that can ever say that they're as good or better than what they thought they were, and they're usually the people that are considered the go to the sports. And their level of arrogance, some people it makes some people crazy. They hate them. Like the players you love to hate them because they know they're good and they'll tell you how good they are, and they can usually back it up. You Michael Jordans, your Kobe Bryants, your Tom Brady's, those guys. And then you realize when you look at them, those guys, they're successful outside of the field or the court as well. They're commentators, they're business owners, they're entrepreneurs, and the things that people don't talk about them, they're also philanthropists. They give of their time, they give of their money, and those are, like, genuinely good people that you maybe don't hear about the things that they're doing. You just see what you see on TV, but when you dig deeper into them, the Wayne Gretzky's and the Rices and the Montanas, and you look at the stuff that they're doing, the time that they're giving off of the court that has so much value that maybe doesn't give them as much of a social media tip. Maybe people aren't seeing that. So I realized at an age that it was far more rewarding to be the instructor, not only on the court and, on the field when I have a camera in my hands, but in the things that I'm doing off, getting involved in different things like causes for pets or uh, Habitat for Humanity and things like that, finding ways that were far more fulfilling for me and not even knowing when I was a young athlete and I was just trying to find my fulfillment through victories that, when you lose a match or you lose a game that you're playing, it crushes you more than the victory helps you.
Mm.
But when I had a victory off the court in seeing somebody that I was helping succeed or seeing a cause that I was helping raise money or do something, reach a goal or surpass that goal, that was so much more satisfying for me because it hit a different part of my psyche inside.
I was just gonna ask, what do you think that is? Those type of, moments or accomplishments, if you will, the experience between winning on the field or on the court versus having an impact in somebody else's life.
It becomes selfishness versus selflessness, is what it comes down to. When I'm trying to win something and I'm not saying you shouldn't. I mean, listen, if you walk out on the court, you want to win the match, but when you win the match, the only person that feels great about winning that match is you. Now, if you're on a team, your coach is happy or your teammates are happy, but as a tennis player, it's literally just me. I walk out there, if I win the match, I'm the only person that's really happy about winning the match. Like, my wife might be happy for me or my parents might have been happy for me, but I'm the only person that's, like, rewarded from that. But if I do something, whether it's as a coach or a philanthropist or somebody that's giving of their time to help with something, multiple people are happy. If I coach somebody and they win a match or they improve and they feel genuinely like, "Hey, man, I got better and I did something and I achieved something." Now, man, I'm excited because I achieved helping that person and they feel that achievement and their families. It's a ripple effect. It's like you throw a stone in the water and you see the ripples go out. Well, if it's a tennis match and it's all about me, there's no ripples. It's that perfect dive, I guess, in high diving where the water goes in and it's clean and there's nothing. That's the only time that that's a good thing that there's no ripples is in high diving. You don't want any splash. But in the real world, you want the splash. And if everything's about you, you're not making a splash. The only thing that you're making a splash in is in your own life. But if you make your actions about others, then those ripples go on. If everything's about you, you're not making a splash. The only thing that you're making a splash in is in your own life. But if you make your actions about others, then those ripples go on. And the reality is you're planting a seed in those people that hopefully they take the lessons they learn from you and they pass those on to others and others. And that ripple goes on long after you're gone. It's like when we started, and I was telling you about my dad. My dad's been dead for 30 some years. He died when I was 17. I'm 53. I'm 53 years old now. My dad's been gone for over 2/3 of my life. My dad's been passed. But the things he's done in me shape the man I am, and the lessons I learned from him are things that I've passed on to others to hopefully help shape other people's lives. And I don't need there to be there to take credit as those things happen. I just need to know that hopefully the things that I do in my life will far outlive my life and be passed on to others through my kids, through my wife, through friends, through students, through people that I've met along the way, if every once in a while you get a tip of the cap from somebody, "Hey, I saw a photo, that somebody else took, but it reminded me of one that you took." I get that every once in a while. Man, I'm like, "That's awesome." Somebody actually saw something that I had nothing to do with, but made them think of me. So I
Yeah.
made a mark on somebody. So it's always kinda nice, and it wasn't a person that was, that I took photos of. It was a person that had gone to my class on how to take this type of photo. So it's just that's so much more gratifying. It's like giving a gift. I hate receiving presents. Like, if you come to our house on Christmas, there might be 1 or 2 things under the tree because I don't tell people what I want, and I really don't want anything. I'm that guy that if there's something I want, I just buy it for myself.
Sure.
And I'm a gift giver. I love giving presents because I love to see the effect on others. I like to see the expressions. I like to see that, and I think long and hard about the gifts I want to give because I don't want it just to be a token gift. Look, another tie, you know, I want it to be something that, wow, that's deep. And there was a lot of thought that went into that. And it's meaningful to them. And it's not something that's just going to sit on a shelf and go away, but it's something they're going to enjoy for life. And I think of everything in that way, in how you interact with people, the things you do, whether again it's just daily interaction and you're treating somebody really kindly, and that ripple, or whether it's somebody you're teaching or helping or a cause that you're working for, it's so much more gratifying. And I think you got to get to a place in your life where you realize that and you set your arrogance aside, you set the selflessness aside or the selfishness aside and embrace the selflessness.
Yeah, I think I mean, such powerful points that you brought up in that. And I think about how just this sustainability over time, right? Like what stays, what sticks. And it's those, for me, I think about moments in my time, even as an athlete, but then just throughout my career as well, too, and just personal life as well, about moments in time where people, had said something so powerful that then I can give that on. And it creates that ripple effect that then I could be that listening ear for the next person, which then could be the listening ear for the next person. And I think that's what connects us all the more. That's how we can really create like such a loving, caring world. But it starts with us and our communities around us. And I think the same thing about gifts as well, too. It's like so crazy, but even just like letters or words or, photographs. Photographs are so powerful. And I wanted to make that connection between your work, in photography and also thinking about impact over time because you can capture these moments in time that are so significant to somebody. Like, let's say, whether it's a big game in sport or it's somebody's wedding, which I know you've had working as a wedding photographer over your career as well too, which you're there capturing that very special, significant day for people in their lives, which then they can go back and they can look at this over time, over time, over time, and it brings them back right into that memory, and then that also stays forever as well too. And so how have you experienced just within your work in that craft to be a channel in that way that's also part of this ripple effect?
Yeah, well, so for me, it's interesting. So my wife is also a photographer. We owned our photography studio together for 2 decades. And you mentioned weddings. We shot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of weddings together. And I had to learn how I tell stories in everything that I do. And our style of photography was very, very different. I look at the whole story. I've always been a big picture guy. So I want to tell everything. So when you looked, like if we were doing a photo of the bridal party at a wedding and they're walking down the street arm in arm, laughing and smiling. I want to capture the whole thing and tell the whole story of the unity of the whole bridal party doing this thing. Well, the same time I'm doing that and I'm telling that story, my wife zooms in at the bride and the groom and just their smiles and the way they're looking at each other at that exact same moment. We both captured the same thing at the same moment, but she's locked in on this tiny part of the story and I'm locked in on the big story. And I think in life we all have to kind of figure out what kind of storyteller we are. My wife is a storyteller of small moments that are, you know, impactful to just that person that they can look at and say, I remember that moment. And I'll hear it. Like she'll get her Facebook moment memories. Like we get those memories. And she'll get those memories and, "Oh, I remember that moment." And I think it's a male-female thing too. As a mom, I remember that moment when our daughter did this or our son did this or whatever, and she remembers that specific emotion. So she tells stories in that tiny, tiny way. And when I tell stories, and if you can't tell by the way I talk and talk and talk, I tell the whole story and give this grand picture of things. So I guess when I look at things from how I'm affecting somebody, I like to look at the big picture. And being married to somebody that looks at things this way versus this way, it's made me slow down to take note of the micro moments that happen in and appreciate those moments. It's like when I go to shoot a football game, I've got a really great friend named Kevin Jurai who's photographed I think the last 11 national championship games for the CFP, and he's their main photographer. Like the CFP, NCAA hires him to go shoot, and he puts together a team that goes out and photographs the whole week. And I was lucky enough to be invited to photograph one for the whole week. It took a whole team of us. I think there were 20 photographers or something like that to tell the story of the whole thing. So as a group, we're telling this story, but I told little pieces of it. And I had to get my mind out of the mentality of I was used to covering games by myself and I had to tell the whole thing. And now I was this. And so if I hadn't had that experience with my wife to put myself in the mentality of, hey, I'm not responsible for the whole story. I'm part of a team. I'm just telling this. And as a tennis player who played a sole sport, an individual sport, I know you played basketball. So you were part of a team. You were able to rely on others. And on tennis, it's just me on the court. I'm by myself. So I wasn't used to having to rely on other people on tennis court. And in photography, the same thing. Typically, if I'm covering a game, just me covering the game. So had I not had the experience of working with my wife closely for so long, and fortunately, I had the best relationship with my wife that we never argue, we never fight. If we disagree on something, we can pretty quickly talk things out and discuss it.
I was gonna say, that's a PSA for any, couples on here. Go to Pete and his wife if you need some counseling.
I am a blessed man, and I say it every day, but I learn a lot from her, and I learn from her the value of slowing down to notice the small moments and not getting caught in the whole big story. And I think that has, worked its way into the way I teach, the way I view how I'm going to mentor or help somebody or work with the cause. It's like, yes, if our goal is to, raise a certain amount of money for a pet shelter to be able to put in, so many kennels in or bring so much food in or something like that. Yes, that's the overall picture, But then there's the finer picture of, the individual owners that one day are going to adopt those pets, and that pet having had this better experience so that when those owners got to them, they saw them in a different light because they were happier. They'd had a better experience. And now they weren't the sad dog that they were rescuing, but they were this happy dog that they couldn't wait to come into their lives. You look at the big picture and the smaller one. And I, I think had I not had her in my life to show me that, I probably would not have been, and I don't wanna say I'm a complete teacher, I have flaws like everybody else, but I feel like now when I talk to my son about life in general, I've got son and a daughter, 17 years old, getting ready to graduate from high school, and, they get caught up on, "What am I gonna do about I gotta buy a house one day, and it's expensive," and I'm like, "Dude, you're still in high school." It's like, "Oh, yeah, but I gotta get a job that's gonna pay for all these things." I'm like, "Hey, you can't go back to this, and you're fortunate enough to have parents. We're covering all those things right now. Enjoy it. Enjoy the moment right now because these moments are gonna go and you don't realize in the grand scheme of things in your life, the first 18 years where you're in high school, it's a blip on the radar. It goes by really quick. The 4 years when you're in college, even shorter blip on the radar. After that, man, it gets serious then. So don't get serious now, get serious then. That's when the bills are there and somebody's knocking on your door every month to find out, "Hey, when's my electricity coming? When's the car payment?" Right now, we've got that. Let us do that so you can enjoy it. So,
Exactly.
just being a parent and reminding people, "Slow down and enjoy the moment you're in. All this is gonna happen no matter what." And I think God tells us that, all
Mm.
this is gonna happen no matter what you do. So don't get caught up in this, remember to enjoy this and take pride in those moments you have and realize how special some of those small moments are because that's what you're going to lock onto later. And if you breeze by it now, you're like, man, I really wish I had taken time to relish that.
Totally, totally. And I want to lean into that a bit more just on the slowing down because we live in a very fast paced, performance driven culture. Even looking at, your journey in your career, like we've been talking a lot about all this going on with photography. And also, you're working, your full time role being at S1 and then doing photography in the background. And then in the middle of all of that, husband, father, you've also been writing and you published books, on photography. And then most recently, growth and structure, which is reflective, on faith and growth and speaks to really that slowing down in those moments, those everyday moments when we're out in nature and we can just, quiet ourselves and then even just experience, the presence of God in that way is, from a faith perspective too in that journey. So I'd love to just go into that a little bit more, given the world that we live in, the pace that we live, in which we live. How has that really just all taken shape and then leading you to even, you know, writing this 30-day journal type book that way?
So it's a 30-day read and it's basically setting aside 10 to 15 minutes each day just to look at life slightly differently, looking at a reflective story on something that's relatable, then tying it into some scripture that and I've never been a fan of somebody throwing a line of scripture at me, but not giving it context. So if I'm using a scripture, I'm usually giving you the context of what was happening in the Bible when that scripture happened so that you can see how it relates to what I'm talking about. So giving you an everyday story in life of something that really happened, giving you some context to it, and giving you a way of using that in your own life to look at things slightly differently. I'm going to talk about my dad a lot because it's been one of those the last few years for me. My dad died when he was 17 of a heart attack, and I was fortunately and unfortunately, I was there when it happened. And I inherited some of the heart issues my dad has. My mother similarly has had two heart valve replacement surgeries. In my life, from the day my dad died at 17, I always thought I was just going to die young. He was 46 when he died. And in my mind from the day he died, I never realized it. I didn't realize it early on, but the older I got, I started to think, man, the day he died, in my mind, clock started ticking down.
Mm.
All right, I've got 46 years because my life was so modeled after him, as I had mentioned, that I was basically just my dad part two. And I couldn't see my life after 46 because I hadn't seen his. I didn't have an example of what that looked like. So I thought I had 46 years. And I knew that, I knew the date that I was going to pass him in age. And I thought, well, when I pass him in age, that weight's going to go away. And I hit 46 and I hit the date that I went a day past. It didn't go away. And I'm like, what is going on here? And then I realized we had our kids older in life than my dad did. And so I realized it wasn't about the number. It was about the experiences that I had had with my dad as a son and my of me having the same experiences with my kids. And I realized my dad died when I was 17, right before I graduated from high school. He died on February 1st, 1990. The reality was my clock would stop ticking in my mind on February 1st of this year when my kids were 17 in high school, and I would then officially be experiencing things in my life with my family and my kids that I hadn't seen my dad experience. So, as of February 2nd, which was just recently, everything now is now something that my dad definitely never experienced, and I definitely never saw. And once I realized that a couple of years ago, that the real date for me to outlive my father and start having new experiences and know, okay, it's okay, the clock is gone, was February 1st. It made me slow down and it made me start looking at things differently and take a different appreciation. I started looking back at my life and started looking at little moments in my life. So instead of looking at my life as a big picture, I started looking at little moments in my life and little things in my life, like a bench in our church that somebody had put a board between two trees a century before that had now become grown in. And it was a bench that you now sit on, and realizing the significance of this bench in the stories and the moments of my life growing up before and after church service and sitting there and things that I experienced, climbing trees and a certain tree that I loved to climb growing up. All these different things that when I look back at the significance of it, if I slowed down and really thought about it, that I was like, those are moments that I could just breeze by them and not realize the significance of them, or I could slow down and realize, man, if I live in the moment, there's a different appreciation there of how God's moving in my life that I can physically see happening right now versus afterwards saying, man, I wish I'd been a little bit more present, but I'm glad it was there because now I can appreciate that he was moving in my life. I just didn't know it. And now through the book, hopefully, just given 10 to 15 minutes every day for 30 days, you can sit back and say, "Oh, man, I never thought about that. I never looked at that." I mean, just it's 15 days on growth, it's 15 days on structure. So the first 15 days are talking about the way farmers plant crops, the way certain types of trees grow, aspen groves. There's thousands of what looks like trees, but realistically, they're just one tree. They just look like thousands of trees. They're just a giant organism. So looking at all these different things that we just go by every day in life, that if we really look at them and slow down, we realize that the work that God is doing in our lives that correlates to those things. And then the structure of simple things like a table or a chair or the cross or a church, and how those things have certain structure that can be relatable to our lives. And to me, it's just having the ability to look at that stuff and realize that we need to work on those things in our lives and have an appreciation for them and not let life go by so fast. It seems like we're always in such a rush to get to the weekend or to the holiday or to the next year or to the next
Yeah.
this, the next that. And we're seemingly rushing life past, but we all are on a clock. I mean, we're definitively going to die at some point. And if we're rushing to get through that and not slowing down to enjoy it, then what's the hurry? Sit down, enjoy your
Yeah.
life. and realize that you need to pass some of this on to the next generation as well. You need to be a good shepherd, you need to be a good disciple for those around you to help them look at what's around them as well and slow down.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think it really increases our awareness as well. You think about that zoomed out perspective versus the zoomed in perspective. And when you're zoomed in, you focus on the details, you see the details. And you zoom out, it's the big picture. And there's beauty in both. And so I think to be able to walk with that awareness that, even as a person of faith, right? Like God is in the big picture and he's also in the details. And how much could that influence our experience day to day whenever we pause to look at those details? You think about, I mean, I consider myself an amateur photographer, right? Like I really appreciate it. I've commented on your background like probably too many times since we first connected, how cool I think it is. And so I really appreciate photography. And I think about even whenever I go somewhere and even doing like travel photography as just an amateur, ways that you try to think about the angles or like, okay, I'm going to get from this perspective because if you look from this perspective, you can see this thing, which you would then miss over here. And so I think about that in just without the lens, without holding a camera, what we can just notice when we are out in our everyday life. And I think that's a big like takeaway for me in this.
Yeah, I think, as a photographer, I used to, like, be so excited and proud of moments to work with certain athletes. I've been blessed to photograph, some big names in my life, and I used to look at those as the pinnacle. Like I photographed Michael Jordan and Reggie Jackson or Hootie and the Blowfish or there's all these people that I've gotten to photograph in different phases of their life. I photographed the presidential inaugural ball. So I was like the photographer photographing the president doing these. I've photographed some amazing moments in my life, and those are great. And they make really great stories to talk about. But when I look at the impact of photography in my life, the biggest impact is actually the relationships I made on the other side, the
Mm.
friends I made through photography that often are other photographers or people that I photographed that became good friends. We've got really close friends who I photographed their wedding. This is Lily is like, I'm done with weddings. And I was like, well, hey, we're in Florida. I can photograph weddings that are an hour, 2 hours long. And we photographed a couple that lives up in Ohio, the Shields. Fantastic. It could have just been one of those weddings where I photographed their wedding and it was done and we never see them again because they live in Cleveland. We've become very good friends with them because we connected on a different level, and we had these common things of our faith and our beliefs and things like that, to where now every time they come down once a year, we spend a week with them and hang out, and we contact them and talk to them, every week. We're messaging each other on social media and stuff like that and keeping up, but people like that who they don't have cameras, but we were part of their lives for one day, and we realized there was something there, and that connection became something else. Friends, I've got a dear friend, his name is Jeff Freeman, that I met through the time when I was working at Canon, and I met him as a photographer, and he and I spent times where I was helping him with printing stuff, or we'd go out and photograph, and he's close to the age my father would be right now, and he became a father figure for me. He filled a void that I had in my life of a male figure who I could go and talk to, who had been through the stages of parenting that I'm going through now that I didn't have. And that so we have lunch every single week, at least once a week. We get together and have lunch or dinner or get together and go photograph or something like that. That's a relationship that I have through photography. Some of my closest friends I've met through photography or tennis or something like that. And my mind used to be, yeah, I photographed this person. I photographed this game. I did these cool things. I played tennis at this cool place. Those used to be the really cool thing. And to me, the cool thing now is the relationships that I have because
Mm.
that I've been in. So, the scope of the lens did really change. It went to being, this is the cool stuff. And then now this is the really cool stuff. This is the stuff that really matters. Those relationships. The person that was on the other side of my lens for 30 seconds that I never even got to speak to, that was really cool that I was there. I got to sit on the tennis court with Andre Agassi and John McEnroe, those guys. Great. As a tennis player, I got to photograph Andre Agassi and Steffi Graf playing tennis,
Yeah.
and I was on the court, only photographer. Lovely, fantastic. But at the end of the day, I never, aside from giving them a little direction and getting some photos, I never developed a relationship with them. And if I met them on the street today, they'd be like, I have no idea who you are. But the other people that I met through photography, those relationships mean something. And you have to learn where to put your value. Yeah, great stories, wonderful. Relationships. And I find that in my life, the stories that I tell now and the people that I talk about now are those people. I talk about Jeff Freeman. I talk about the Shield. I talk about Brent Smith. I talk about these people that I have relationships with that I wouldn't have had otherwise, that have had influence on my life and have meant something to me because of that. And those stories, maybe they aren't as exciting to the people I'm telling them to, but they're more meaningful. And hopefully the people that you talk to about those relationships realize, man, you know what? I've been looking at this wrong the whole time.
Mm. Yeah, it's such a huge lesson, I think, because again, going back to the performance, wanting to do the next thing and next thing is and always like, oh, I have achieved this, right? Or I've, in any kind of respective industry or craft of what you're doing, you always think about how you can, you have this moment, it's going to be the top moment. And I think we can all kind of, reflect on our journeys and careers in that way. But then when you lean into that, you take a deeper dive into that and you realize the significance in that all and what has sustained over time. Maybe, some relationships come and go, right? Naturally, but like really thinking about those relationships and how impactful that has been. I think about it in my own journey, Pete, and this just, it reminds me of that all the more, of those relationships that to me are everything that I would, take away my medals for X, Y, and Z that I've had that I think are really cool that I feel like, like I've accomplished something, but those relationships are all the more meaningful. And I think that's where ultimate, impact lives within one another and for future, and we can give that on.
Yeah, absolutely. I have boxes and boxes of trophies and plaques and medals sitting in storage because the value of that, again, that the selfishness of look what I've done. And
Yeah.
the funny thing is, I look at when I talk to people about my greatest accomplishment now, I point to my kids. I point to my friendships, I point to my relationships, and I'm like, man, that's way more impressive than a stupid plaque on the wall or a medal that was around my neck at some point.
Yeah.
The value is, something that can speak to me into my character verbally and
Mm,
actually say something about what impact I've had on their lives says a lot more than something that's hanging on the wall for a single day's recognition for something that, yes, I worked hard for, but at the end of the day, that ended. You worked to a goal, you accomplished that goal, and great, I've got something, a certificate or a medal or a plaque to show that I achieved that. But once that's over, it no longer speaks for me because now I've moved on to the next thing. But the relationships I have in life, they keep going and going and going, and they never stop. So it's like, my greatest trophies, my greatest certificates, my greatest plaques are the ones that there's no end date on. I'm always working on them. I'm always, nurturing them. I'm always working on those relationships and doing what I can because, they never stop. They keep getting better and,
so good. Well, this has been a great conversation, Pete. Thank you for opening up, for sharing your journey, for digging into the different parts, of your story and how all these threads and connections that we can make along the way and just that importance of slowing down, of leaning into our relationships, of taking in the moments, the small moments and the big moments as well, but really just like centering into what's important. And I think it is the learnings along the way. You can see on the outside all of these amazing things and the accomplishments. And that's why I think there's so much beauty in this space to be able to go into that and really see the beauty that's beyond the surface, beyond the accomplishments. And so thank you for going there and sharing that with us.
yeah, thank you for having me on. Like I said, I it's a little uncomfortable for me. I've never been one that likes to sit and talk about myself. I can sit and talk about a brand or a product or how to use a camera or a printer or something all day long, but when I have to talk about myself and my life, It's a little uncomfortable and a little awkward, but there's lessons in everything, and I'm happy to be here and really honored that you invited me on.